some requests for extensions from the from the BMR Energy, the private sector organization of Jamaica, Wigton Wind Farm Limited, and WRB Energy. So as in the other committee that I have the honor to chair, I would propose that if the committee seems in agreement with it, that we could extend for an additional 2 weeks. The request, one of the requests on JPS specifically requested up to May 5th, 2021, but I would not be opposed to proposing a 2-week extension. That 2-week extension would start from today. So I'm not sure the feeling of the committee, but if you're in agreement, we could agree to do that.
So agreed, Chairman.
Who is that? Member Hilton?
Yes. Good morning.
Good morning.
Could you like turn it down a little bit?
So, members, I don't know if anybody has any comment or objection on that. If not, we can agree to propose a 2-week extension and ask the committee coordinator, obviously, to coordinate the presentations from those who have made a request to present. Of course, under go ahead.
When we had gotten the first request from the JPS, yes, the committee had agreed to May 5 for an extension. As you were saying, several entities requested.
It's too loud.
And I sent information to the committee members regarding said requests from the others. And they had agreed to May 5. So I'm not sure if we're extending it further to another time.
Oh, so just remind me. So what's the date that was agreed by the members?
May 5, sir.
May
5th.
May 5th.
Yes.
Which will be next week.
Yes, sir.
And has that gone out to them? Have they been communicated that?
Yes, sir. I have done so.
So we leave it at we leave it for the May 5th. That's fine. Okay. In terms of new dates for committee meetings, you want to do that on the AOB or you want to do it now?
AOB, sir.
On the AOB.
I'm not sure if you want to do the minutes or if you're going to.
Yes, I'll do.
Minister, you're muted.
Sorry about that. No, so in relation to the minutes, I would ask if there's any comments on the minutes.
Minister, before you go to the minutes, just a query. My understanding is that the suggested date is May 5th. Is that correct, or is it as you suggested earlier?
That's correct. Apparently, it was the committee members were consulted by the coordinator, the committee coordinator, and a date of May 5th was agreed and communicated to those seeking extensions.
And everyone is okay with that?
I would take it because I don't know if this McCarthy has any other correspondence from any of them based on the date that was given.
No, Minister. Practically most members had agreed to May 5th.
But was that prior to? Did I take account of the request from the person that the minister indicated?
Yes, Member Ilson.
Okay.
Members, all the entities listed were included in the extension.
And is it that there was no response, or are you assuming that everybody's assuming they're okay with that May 5th date?
Well, when I sent the information to the entities that requested the extension and indicated that the committee was fine with May 5, because I didn't want to confuse the extension date. And because the first entity that requested May 5th, I had sent that to the committee asking whether May 5th was an okay date, and the members had agreed with that.
Okay. It's just that, Minister, my only concern is that what we don't want is having given an extension, that at the end of that extension, there are requests for further extension. So if everyone is comfortable with the May 5th date, then so be it. Fine.
Thank you for that, member. Thank you for that. So I would now move to the review and confirmation of the minutes dated March 5th, 2021, and ask whether or not there's any corrections to the minutes, any proposed corrections, or any matters arising from the minutes. I note that Minister Main, Member Hamilton, Member Paulwell, Member Aubin Hill, and as I see Aubin Hill's name, he did give me a WhatsApp apology yesterday. So you can note that for me from the meeting. And he had a conflict in his diary. Member Leslie Campbell, Member Shireen Golding, and Member Janice Allen were present at that meeting. So I would ask if any of them have any corrections or any matters arising from that, and if not, propose the adoption of the minutes.
None for me, Chair.
So can I take it that Member Allen, or Member Golding, is proposing the adoption of the minutes? Can I get a second?
I so do, Minister.
That is Member Campbell, Leslie Campbell. Thank you for that, Member Golden and Member Campbell. So as I said before, welcome to those members who are attending for the first time. And as we have today, just a presentation from the Ministry of Science, Energy and Technology, which I suspect Mr. Fitzroy Vidal will be leading. I don't know, Mr. Vidal, do you have any other members of the team that you want to introduce?
No, Minister, just ready to go.
Okay, and then as I said before,
yes, Minister.
Go ahead.
Sorry, there is Miss Shanicia Pollock, our legal officer. She's online as well.
Thank you for that. So as I said, we'll have Mr. Vidal present. And as I said before, that would
Minister, you're muted.
That would be the presentation for today. And then we'd ask the committee coordinator to coordinate with those who have indicated a willingness to participate in the joint select and have those. And then we'll get to the date. Due dates under AOB. So Mr. Vidal, welcome and over to you.
Sure, thank you very much, Minister, Chairman of the Joint Select Committee, acknowledging also opposition spokesman, Mr. Philip Paulwell, other members of Parliament from both sides of the House, members of the Senate from both sides of the House, Good morning. I'm going to share my screen. Sure. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Sure.
Yes, I'm
Thanks,
seeing
Beth.
it.
Very good. Just want to very briefly indicate that while we're talking about the Electricity Act of 2015 this morning, the Ministry of Science, Energy and Technology has been implementing a program for the energy sector in support of the government's broader objectives. And within the context of the National Energy Policy of 2009 through to 2030, which I've highlighted here very briefly, the vision of that policy, which is a modern, efficient, diversified, environmentally sustainable energy sector, providing affordable and sustainable energy supplies with long-term energy security and supported by informed public behavior on energy issues and an appropriate policy, regulatory, and institutional framework. That's our vision. And the mission is captured in this statement, which says to secure Jamaica's energy future, advance competitiveness, and promote sustainable prosperity. The main elements or the outcomes that this policy seeks to achieve: energy security, diversifying the energy mix, reduce dependence on imported oil, reduce exposure to the vagaries of the international oil markets. We also seek to increase access to electricity for our customers, consumers, and residents, ensure reliable supply of energy, modern energy infrastructure that is efficient, lower costs, improve governance arrangements for the sector, and clearly to utilize more environmentally friendly fuel options. It is within that context that in August 2015, the Most Honorable Sir Patrick Allen, Governor General of Jamaica, gave consent for the act to repeal the Electric Lighting Act of 1890, the Electricity Frequency Conversion Act, and the Electricity Development Act, and to consolidate and modernize the laws relating to generation, transmission, and the distribution, supply, dispatch, and the use of electricity and for connected matters. Within the framework of the Vision 2030 and the National Energy Policy, the Act has the following objectives. Provide for a modern system of regulation for the generation, transmission, distribution, supply, dispatch, and use of electricity. Promote transparency in identification and allocation of costs and revenues within and between participants in the electricity sector. To promote clarity in relation to the respective roles and responsibilities of the stakeholders of the electricity sector. To facilitate the achievement of the efficient, effective, sustainable, and orderly development of the electricity supply infrastructure supported by adequate levels of investment. To promote energy efficiency and the use of renewables and other energy sources. Prescribe the required standards in the electricity sector. Ensure the protection and safety of consumers of electricity and the public, and to ensure that the regulation of the electricity sector is transparent and predictable. So the key roles under the administration of the Act: the Minister has the role of setting policy and for planning. Office of Utilities Regulation, which is a regulatory authority, regulatory entity for the electricity sector. The Generation Procurement Entity being the procurer of new generation capacity, both in terms of additional capacity and the replacement of JPS's old generators. And of course, the government electrical regulator that will regulate electrical works done by electricians and inspectors who would inspect such works before being authorized to be connected to the grid. And of course, it also describes the standards of the single buyer. The Act is in 15 sections listed here. All these areas are elements that are under implementation, have been implemented, and those yet to be implemented, which is the subject of this review process. Major activities development undertaken since the promulgation of the Act in August 2015. The first stop was the amendment of the OUR Act in December 2015. Similarly, by January 2016, the All-Island Electricity License was renegotiated to make sure that the provisions in the Act are now reflected both in the OUR Act and the Electricity License. Similarly, in 2016, the award of 37 megawatts of solar farm project to 8 Rivers Energy Company that was eventually commissioned into service. The development of a book of codes relating to the generation business, the transmission sector, subsector, the distribution sector, supply sector, economic load dispatching sector. Book of codes was developed under the supervision of the OUR, and that was done within a year of the passage of the Act. The bar for the theft of electricity was raised, essentially to make it a criminal offense, and fines were increased. The generation procurement entity was so established by the legislation, and the latest iteration of that generation procurement entity went into force in January of this year. Final draft of the first integrated resource plan arising from the minister's planning function was approved by Cabinet in February of 2020. The Electricity Appeals Tribunal has been in operation. There's replacement of more than 50,000 street lights. Inefficient, incandescent street lights have been replaced with light emitting diodes, far more efficient. Currently, the National Energy Policy 2009 is being updated to reflect more developments or policy positions going forward. The policy being updated, the electric mobility policy is being developed, and already the electric strategic mobility framework is in the final draft stage. Of course, we see need for the development of a national integrated energy plan. Recall that the integrated resource plan is electricity planning. But as the emergence of electric mobility, electric vehicles and the likes, then there's a merger of the electricity and the transportation sector. And therefore, as a ministry with responsibility for energy, they need to develop a national integrated energy plan that will represent both the electricity and the transmission sector. Is being pursued. Other activities developments undertaken based on the integrated resource plan, which identified some $2.6 billion worth of investment over the next 20 years. Cabinet gave approval for this first tranche of 515 megawatts to be implemented. Already 37 megawatts of solar 8 Rivers was implemented. JPS old plants replacement continued, and we've seen the 190 megawatts of natural gas plant at Olaba commissioned into service, 94 megawatts of natural gas fired plant at Jamaica, and 10 megawatts of 14 identified under the JPS right of first refusal. That is essentially replacement of gas turbine number 14 at the Bogue Power Station in Montego Bay. New transmission reinforcement, essentially the 24.5 megawatt battery storage facility at Hunts Bay, St. Andrew, to mitigate against the intermittencies of solar and wind power. JPS, in an article earlier this year, indicated that since the implementation of this battery storage facility, they have seen outages associated with intermittent renewables reduced by some 78%. For net billing, where customers of JPS can generate electricity for their own use as self-generators to supply themselves and sell the excess to the grid, some 860 licenses have been issued, reflecting some 21.842 megawatts of capacity. 23 auxiliary connections have been issued, 7.934 megawatts. And of course, there are 4 applications for power wheeling that are being processed. Of course, towards the implementation of 100% electrification in Jamaica by 2030, the ministry conducted a study called the Enrica International Study that looked at all the areas that are unelectrified and have identified some of the considerations to bring electrification to 100% of the Jamaica region. That study was done, and currently an implementation plan is under development. Net billing, the regulations, net billing regulations, the first draft in 2017 was updated several times, but is at very close to final stage now. Power wheeling first draft was also in 2017, and auxiliary connections first draft in 2017. When they were submitted to the CPC, CPC, we're told, was asked us to prioritize the 3 regulations to ensure that they could focus. So we had identified the net billing as the first, to be followed by power wheeling auxiliary connections. Of course, the government electrical regulator, those regulations were approved in November of last year, 2020. And of course, fixed penalties provisions as required by the Act for the OUR to apply fixed penalties to licensees who breach their directives. Those are in final draft as well. Current amendments to the Electricity Act being contemplated and being pursued. Of course, the generation procurement entity is an amendment that is being pursued to indemnify the members of the generation procurement entity. This is a concern that was raised by previous members, and that is being pursued. Government electrical regulator, the amendment seeks to remove the board from the GER and to make it as a department of government reporting to the administration. And of course, we're advised by CPC that in the specific case of auxiliary connections, an amendment of the Electricity Act is necessary in order to advance the regulations for auxiliary connections, because the primary act did not identify auxiliary connections. It spoke to net billing, power wheeling, and other connections. Stakeholder consultation identified auxiliary connections as the 3rd category, and the act would have to be amended to address that. The matter of further competition in the electricity sector is something that was contemplated by the energy policy by the Electricity Act, and net billing, power wheeling, other connections are first stages of allowing persons to generate their own electricity. Significantly more independent power producers are participating, and through competition to supply electricity to the single buyer. And the draft electricity policy will give further consideration to the further deregulation or competition as may be necessary. The role of the single system operator, an arm of the single buyer, is also key to further competition, because the role of the single buyer, the Act requires that the system operator be a separated department within the single buyer, and the head of the system operator to report directly to the board of directors, intending to allow it some level of independence in performing the system operator function. The means of dispatching generators is the merit order dispatch system, and the Act also allows for access to real-time information concerning dispatch activities to be made available to the OUR, the minister, and the independent power producers, and an attempt to make the dispatch program more transparent. Of course, the Act also made provision for compensation to consumers or customers, compensation to customers for additional costs resulting from out-of-merit dispatch. And of course, the Act also makes provisions for protocols for managing major system outages under the single buyer. The government electrical regulator, this is what the transition looks like. We're moving from a situation where the government, through the government electrical inspectorate, and the former board of examiners, were government entities and the electricians were always private. We're transitioning to where the government electrical regulator will be regulating the electrical works industry with a committee of examiners, and of course the inspectors and the electricians will be the private sector stakeholders. Right, the Act also makes provision for electricity funds. There's a system benefit fund. The Act specifies that it could be resourced through tariffs as the office may direct. That should be as the office may direct. It may also be resourced through fines collected pursuant to the Act, and it could also be financed through monies from the consolidated fund or any other source. Of course, the benefits from the system benefit fund are to the right of your screen. Increase the penetration of renewable energy or energy security, promotion of energy conservation, providing electricity to rural areas, and other purposes as may be gazetted. Of course, the Act also makes provision for other electricity funds that may be established by the office after consultation with the minister for the benefit of the system. Some recent investments in energy efficiency, primarily in the public sector projects, the installation of heat-reducing film on the windows and doors, glass windows and doors of many of the public sector facilities, application of cool roof solutions to the roof of some of the buildings, installation of energy efficiency air conditioning solutions to effectively reduce the cost of electricity to the government, and of course employing more energy efficient technologies. The light emitting diodes, lighting upgrades at the JPS, as well as JPS street lights, as well as in government facilities, are also being undertaken. Challenges. Since the promulgation of the legislation, we have had 5 ministers with responsibility for energy. Of course, this has implication for board appointments. 4 permanent secretaries for the Ministry of Science, Energy and Technology. And there's a noticeable staff turnover rate of key technical officers. Opportunities, the public sector modernization and rationalization program. We have seen the rationalization of energy sector public entities. Petroleum Corporation of Jamaica was wound up. Well, it's been wound up, but closed in March 2020. National Energy Solutions Limited, NESOL, was also wound up. And the study for 100% electrification by 2030 is already done, and we're working with the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development to develop a plan for its full implementation. By way of concluding remarks, the energy landscape in Jamaica is changing. Consistent with the energy policy for creating a modern, efficient, diversified, and sustainable energy sector, the IRP will guide additional investment in the electricity sector. The IEP, being the Integrated Energy Plan, will guide overall development of the energy sector. Several old and inefficient generating plants will be retired and replaced with modern and efficient plants. Additional renewable energy capacity will be needed to meet the RE targets of the government. Electric vehicles will also create additional electricity demand and improve transportation efficiency. Alternative energy sources will play a significant part in the future of the energy in Jamaica, and the stage is set for the next wave of renewable and alternative energy investments in Jamaica. That's the end of the presentation, Minister. Thank you very much. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vidal. I would open the floor to members for inputs. You can just raise your hand and I will acknowledge. Member Paul, well, you want to start?
Yes, thanks so much, Chairman. I will be brief because I really want to spend some time, you know. By the way, today is the state presenter is the ministry. So we're not going to hear any other presentations today.
Just the ministry today, that's correct. And then as of the next meeting, we'll have the presentations flowing from the...
Let me thank Mr. Vidal for the presentation. He did mention that in this period, one of the major challenges has been 5 ministers in the position, but he didn't mention that there's only been 1 opposition spokesperson in the position, which is a positive. You know, these things need to be stated.
And hopefully 1 minister going forward with 1 opposition person.
Minister, you know, I wish you well. I wish you well. And again, I have to commend you for the way that you have been very receptive to my questionings. A couple of things, Mr. Vidal. Under the objectives, you mentioned that one objective was the efficiency and the use of renewables and other energy. Perhaps it might be appropriate for us to take out renewables and let it stand on its own rather than to link it with other energy. As I think based on the government's own pronouncements, we'll be looking to enlarge our ambition for renewables as a body, whether it's solar, wind, water. So probably we could look at a recommendation to single out renewables as a major objective going forward. Somebody's.
Sorry, Member Paul, but can I ask everybody to mute their mics so that we don't get any interference while the presenter is speaking? Thank you so much.
All right. Secondly, in terms of the right of first refusal, that was an understanding at the time when the law was passed. I believe that that time has long gone, and we probably need to modify this reference to the right of first refusal. It was a time when we were approaching generation shortage, and we needed to move quickly to get procurement. Now that we have seen 515 megawatts of procurement being achieved, I believe that right of first refusal principle ought to be sidelined and full competition in terms of procurement reigns. And in that regard, I note the difficulty we were having in terms of organizing a system operator that would be responsible for dispatching. And there was a notion that once a major player is involved in directing dispatching, even with a merit order, it would not be the most transparent vehicle to ensure that that merit order is properly adhered to. And perhaps now is the time to look at separating completely this issue of system operator, dispatching based on merit order, into a body that is totally independent. I know there was an attempt to do so, but I'm not too sure if that has been achieved based on some of the complaints that I get from time to time. And finally, is it that we should use this opportunity to enshrine provisions in a new Electricity Act or in an amended Electricity Act, or can we rely on expedition now to get these regulations in place? We have been waiting for power wheeling for many years, and therefore applicants must be close to retirement age for the long wait that they've been waiting. So probably you can just provide us with an update on those as to why to date we have not been able to complete those regulations, and would it be appropriate for us to embody some of those provisions in an amended law? All right, those are my comments.
Thank you, Member Paul. Mr. Vidal?
Sure. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Powell, for those comments. All right. With respect specifically to the, just want to correct something that you said. I don't know if I was one who might have said it incorrectly. You asked, you contemplated that the ROFA be modified since we have had 515 megawatts of procurement. I just want to clarify that. The comment about modification for the ROFA stands. I have no issue with that. What happened is that the cabinet decision arising from the integrated resource plan is for the first tranche of generation capacity to be procured, which is 515 megawatts to be procured.
So wait a minute, Mr. Vidal. You're saying that the government is looking to procure new generation of 515 megawatts? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, with 171 of that is actually replacement to replace old plants of JPS. So that 171 megawatts, sorry, that 515 megawatts is comprised as follows. 171 megawatts of plants to replace by JPS under the ROFA, and that is any approved combination of firm renewables, intermittent renewables, or conventional technology. 171 megawatts to replace specific plants that are now considered old and archaic. In addition to that, there is the provision for procurement of 242, well, up to 268 megawatts of solar and wind, up to 268 megawatts of solar and wind. $36 megawatts of hydro, upwards of 20 megawatts of waste to energy, and 20 megawatts of biomass. Right, so that is that's the first tranche of procurement to take place under the Integrated Resource Plan. The ROFA started, as you rightly alluded, prior to the Integrated Resource Plan. And hence we have the 190 megawatts at Toll Harbor, this 94 megawatts at Jamaica, and some 10 megawatts already, or 14 for GT14.
I think you're also missing out the 120 megawatts at Bogue. Even though that was an old plant, that was a facilitation granted to the JPSCO, and that should
Right. So, thank you very much, Mr. Paulwell. However, that one would be considered modification, retrofitting to burn natural gas and diesel, but it wouldn't be replacement, so to speak. To your point about the expedition of the regulations, yes, the regulations have suffered some challenges. The power wheeling, the 4 applications that I mentioned, one, we believe we have sufficiently completely processed, and it's really waiting on the regulations actually to be implemented. Those net billing regulations are having benefited from feedback from the Solicitor General's chambers and other stakeholders. I think is in its penultimate final stages before going back to CPC. In fact, may have gone back to CPC.
That's correct, Mr. Vidal. That's
right.
my understanding.
Yes, went back to CPC, I think, earlier this week. And of course, we were trying to complete the net billing first, as was guided by CPC, and then we'll be able to move quickly with the power wheeling and the auxiliary connections. The other 2 can be expedited because they're going to benefit from some of the considerations in the net billing regulations. But pretty much I know the status is that they are being expedited. As I said, I mean, several changes along the way would have negatively affected the pace.
Dispatch?
All right, the independent system operator. So the Electricity Act makes provision for the system operator to be more transparent in his operation, and that is the basis for the inclusion of elements to treat with how the system operator is, using my word, ring-fenced within JPS. But of course, your point is appropriate that this is the time to look at whether we could and should go further in respect of making it truly independent. Because notwithstanding the merit order dispatch, economic dispatch methodology for dispatching plants, there's always going to be considerations by the competition or the persons participating as to the full independence of the dispatcher in making decisions about how plants are dispatched. And this is at the heart of why the system exists, to provide cost-effective, cheap, reliable, safe electricity supplies to the country.
Chairman, I'm going to allow others to comment now, but later on, I would love if you would allow me to go back to the issue of the right of first refusal and the procurement process for this 500 and odd megawatts. I have some views that I'd like to share with you on the committee.
Not a problem, member Paulwell. Member Hilton, Anthony Hilton. Go ahead, sir. As Member Hilton's hand up, I can't see everybody's. So if there's anybody who has their hand up, please go right ahead.
All right, if there's nobody.
Member, it looks like you have the floor.
Yeah.
With your level of experience, we would have expected that, eh?
Yeah, I'm very concerned, Minister, as we enter into this new round of procurement based on the resource, the work that has been done to provide this this map. We now issue licenses for independent power providers, and they get a 20-year license where certain things are enshrined. For them, it was an attempt to ensure that investors would come to Jamaica, that there would be great certainty. But I want to caution at this stage, because we're seeing just such rapid transformation in our electricity sector, in technologies and so on, that when you think of granting a 20-year license now, you're really handicapping the country somewhat into prices that are guaranteed to the investor, but will not enable your consumers to take advantage of the flexibility that ought to come with improvements in technology, which result in lower prices. Coupled with that, I think to give the JPSCO this advantage after 5 years of putting them in the front of the line for 171 megawatts, when we should be looking at greater competition to get this procurement going. I understand why we did it initially. I was the minister there. But as we strive for greater competition in these matters, I would say we have to contemplate this one a lot more, so that all of it be open to international competition. The best technology will win, and at the best prices for the consumers. I fundamentally believe in competition, and I do not believe that granting 171 megawatts upfront to the JPSCO, as in keeping with the right of first refusal principle, is relevant anymore. And these 20-year licenses that we're signing, I want to warn against them. I know that investors want the assurances. They want to be able to invest capital based on a certain return over 20 years. I don't believe at this time it is in the country's best interest for us to tie up electricity generation and distribution in a 20-year horizon, when, as we look down this road, we are seeing some amazing things happening that would unburden our consumers if they have access to them. So it's a great caution I'm putting out there as we move to procure. I don't know if we need 515 megawatts, and I know you've worked very hard on this, Mr. Vidal, the entire team. I don't know if we need so much capacity at this time, but I caution that to tie up the future of the country for 20 years, when so many things are happening in the technology realm, might not be the best decision that is taken at this time.
Before Mr. Vidal
Chairman,
responds, before you respond, Mr. Vidal, I think Member Paul, you take on board what you have said. It has a lot of merit, and we have actual an experience, as we are in relation to our current arrangement, which obviously was done with all the best intent, but obviously based on the fact that technology has changed and times have changed, and the world market has changed. We see what's happening with that. So let me just ask Mr. Vidal to come in and respond, and then Mr. Hilton, Mr. Anthony Hilton, Member Hilton is up after.
Sure, Minister, thanks. Again, great contributions. They just want to point out, though, Member Paulwell. Right.
I mean, I think we have somebody who needs to mute the mic. I'm not sure. We're hearing doors closing and so on.
Right. Let me go on. Right. So yes, the point about 20-year PPAs, I fully endorse that point personally, that the 20-year PP might be an issue going forward. And there are other elements to do with take or pay in gas contracts that are issues that I mean we should seek to address through this exercise. However, I just want to point out, Mr. Paulwell, that the capacity requirements of 515 should really be read as 334, because 171 of it is replacement. It is replacing existing plants. It's not additional plants. We're not putting in additionally 500 odd megawatts. You're replacing 171 for the JPS and everything else that we mentioned, waste to energy, hydro, biomass, solar and wind, are renewables. And you will appreciate.
Just remember, Mr. Vidal, where are these 171 megawatts existing now?
All right, I'm not looking at the list right here now, but it involves plants at Rockfort. It involves plants at other gas turbines at Bogue and at Hunts Bay.
Yeah. My previous comments still stand, even though Rockfort is affected.
But it's affected positive because you're replacing it to get a new plants. But anyway, what I wanted to say is that the 171 megawatts for JPS is not considered by the legislation to be independent power producer. It is not intended to be independent power producer because it is supposed to be implemented in the rate base. What I mean by that, for those who are not so aware, is that the independent power producer methodology comes with what is called a fixed, for conventional plants, comes with what is called a fixed payment and an energy payment. Truth be told, that is these two payments, particularly the fixed payment, that is responsible for some of the higher prices of electricity. Because the capacity you pay for is just to be there and available when needed. And in addition to that, you pay for energy. That's what happens with the current independent power producers. The replacement that JPS is doing is being contemplated in the rate base, where the utility would more than likely have different objectives other than the straight IPP investor. IPP wants to recoup their investment well within the 20 years. The utility company can recoup its investment over much longer periods. So the asset could stay for a longer period, and therefore the amortization cost is less impactful on prices. So the ROFA contemplates rate base, ROFA meaning right of first refusal, contemplates rate base replacement, where the utility would replace it within its asset base, and it's not an independent power producer. That is how it was always conceptualized. But of course, this discussion will take us to where we get eventually. The renewables, Mr. Paul, the renewables do not come with firm capacity payments. Straight energy that you pay for. And that is the perspectives to get lower prices in the long run.
Amen. And so therefore, my comments are unchanged as we look towards greater renewables being added, and as renewables become more and more perfect substitute for other fuels, I think this is where we need to go. Minister, I still, I feel that we have to debate this issue a little bit more about the right of first refusal, the 334 new capacity. I am seeing some amazing things happening. I am hearing Jamaicans, Minister, speaking about their own desire to generate their electricity, to enable more net billing or even separation from the grid. And as the cost of these things become cheaper, it's a reality. And right now, when more people leave the grid, Minister, it is those who remain on the grid who have to take up those payments, those investment payments, those fixed demand payments. And I believe that more and more people are going to be leaving the grid as they realize it is cheaper to do so. And those who remain will be saddled for 20 years with these high payments. So I caution how we go about procuring new capacity at this time.
Point taken, member. Thank you. Member Hilton? You have to unmute. Not hearing
Can you
you.
hear me? Can you hear me?
Good, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm hearing you.
All right, I would want to join Member Paulwell broadly in the observations that he's making or he has made with regard to the 370 odd megawatts of new power on the system. And I wondered whether this discussion should not be taking place as well in the broader context of the license expiring in 2016 or 2026. When is it specifically?
2027.
So without
2027.
2027. But notice has to be given when? Much earlier.
Yes, 5 years earlier.
5 years time.
5 years earlier.
Earlier. Okay, so it's
23.
2022. Is that 2022?
Yes, yes, Minister. Yes, Mr.
Huh?
Yes, sir.
Well, that's significant, yeah? Because if you have to give notice in 2022, some consideration must be given at or around now. Otherwise, come 2022, you will not be able to signal, that is the government, what its approach is likely to be, and that will have legal implication. And if we're not careful, that can take us over into some other periods at huge cost to the consumer and really a disfiguring of the system. And I say disfiguring because, remember, Paul really is substantially correct. Well, he's very correct in that with the technology shifts that are taking place, and for the reasons that you have pointed out about the traditional sources of energy and the and the pricing mechanism, particularly with the PPEs, with the PPAs. With the PPAs, it poses all kinds of risk. All kind of risk to the consumer and businesses and household alike. And I think we have to give some consideration. And certainly, from my point of view, I'd want to hear what those considerations are with respect to this license coming to an end and how we're preparing ourselves to ensure that we can properly integrate our policies and strategies going forward so that we have a system that works for the Jamaican people and the Jamaican economy as a whole. So could someone say, what is the thinking about the license and the license coming to an end, at least the period coming to an end, and with particularly the notice period. And I want to lay emphasis on the notice period because it's there for a reason, and it's largely legal. And so I want to be on record to say that we have to pay attention to that notice period and to decide what kind of notice we'll be conveying in the next year or so. And then one more comment, if you will. The technology is not only as to generation, new technology. There's new technology as well in transmission. And that has been a part of the problem in the losses, technical losses on the grid. And we have to look at the new technologies that affect not only generation and energy type, but also transmission. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you very much. Mr. Vidal, you want to respond?
Right, so very quickly, acutely aware of the point raised by Mr. Hilton. Currently, the ministry is engaged with discussions with the World Bank to help the ministry give consideration to the points Mr. Hilton just raised in respect of preparation for those license expiration which comes up. The World Bank is being engaged and there are some preliminary discussions there. Concept is being put together to help distill the government's position. And of course, that includes, appropriate consultations, making it ready to have dialogue with the JPS when that time comes. In respect of the transmission, perfectly correct, and also on the distribution as well. So what we see happening in the landscape of the power system is that you will see a shift from central generation to more distributed generation. Already, the net billing mechanisms, for example, are bringing generation in at the distribution level. And more of those are planned in respect of the capacity that we spoke about earlier, 300 megawatts of solar and wind. Rather than coming at the transmission level, some of it is contemplated at the distribution level and appropriately distributed across the system. So yes, technology for both the transmission, the distribution, and the generation are all part of the considerations. And tie that in with the emergence of electric vehicles, because the distribution grid must be modernized to be able to adequately allow for the interfaces, even with electric vehicles, and all the storage opportunities that are presenting themselves. So yes, the grid has to be modernized. And those considerations are being given some regard.
Clarification. Just for clarification, Minister. I just, that answer, Mr. Vidal, I listened to it carefully, and I want to put the question very clearly. Is it that there is a specific, are you assuring us that there's a specific plan to be ready with the approach for the notice period as it falls due next year?
Sure. So the discussions with the bank, the World Bank that is, are ongoing, and we reach a stage where they are supposed to come back to the ministry with a mechanism as to how we could finalize the plans in time for that notice period.
Okay. Thank you, Minister.
Remember, you mentioned the electric vehicle, which obviously is becoming a exciting industry, and just to indicate that the IDB did have some consultative meetings with the Ministry of Finance in relation to the structure, specifically the duty structure, that we are awaiting the final position on that to move the policy ahead, because we are already getting quite a number of communications from automobile dealers in Jamaica who are anxious, obviously, based on the pattern and where the technology is going. So I will be speaking to that in more detail as soon as we finalize with the Ministry of Finance to conclude a policy, and of course have consultations, wide consultations in relation to the implementation of that. But we are still committing to have that policy in place by the end of this financial year.
Minister?
Is that
Minister?
Campbell?
Yes, Minister.
Go ahead, my brother.
I just wanted to ask, the government shareholding in JPS, how is that likely to be impacted by this? Well, if we were to have entities like the University of the West Indies, the hotels, the bauxite plants, if they were to take themselves off the grid, what's the implication for the value of the government shareholding as it's presently stands?
Member Campbell, just say that again. I had a little interference with the internet.
Yes, the government has a shareholding in JPS. And if we were to have the likes of the University of the West Indies, the bauxite plants, the big hotels, if they were to leave the grid, well, and they were to do so tomorrow morning, I don't know to what extent they have, because I recall some time ago there was talk about the University of the West Indies leaving the grid. What's the implication for the value of the government shareholding?
It's a point I was making, Chairman, and I'm very mindful, Chairman, that Senator Campbell, Shireen Campbell, her hand has been up for a while, so I don't want to speak too long. But the point I was making is that we have to be careful how we grant these new licenses, because we have the reality today of these enterprises, UA, Red Stripe, and others, I believe, will come, that will see the lowering of revenues by the company as these enterprises leave the grid. And it therefore means that whatever the government makes in its 20% will also be diminished. Profits will diminish, and the company's viability will diminish. But as night follows day, you're going to get to that point, especially because the price of electricity, unfortunately, has gone back up to in a realm that makes it uncompetitive for businesses in Jamaica.
Point well taken, Minister. I concur with that 100%. Mr. Vidal, I don't know if you want to come in and give any response to Member Campbell, and then we can have Senator Golding.
Right.
My apologies, Senator Golding. I see the name Shireen Campbell at your name, but it is indeed.
Sorry, it's Golding Campbell. That's correct. I just stuck with the Golding. All right, go ahead, Mr. Vidal.
Yes, right. Thank you, Minister. So that the question raised and the response by Mr. Paulwell pretty much addresses the response because as the price goes up, the businesses become less competitive and they're going to opt for solutions to get off the grid. And the more who are able to do so, the higher the cost for those who remain on the grid. And that's a spiral that we don't want to see happen. So it is tied back to what was said earlier about the length of these PPAs, power purchase agreements, the terms and conditions in the PPAs. This is to do with take or pay for gas contracts and so forth. Those have no business going forward. And so the broader discussion is, how do we make the grid what it was intended to be? The cheapest source being the bulk distributor, but it is not. And it's largely because those who are able to, financially that is, are exiting the grid. And so as those persons leave, it becomes more problematic for those who remain.
I suppose you have a contingency, and you may want to share that with us. Because certainly we don't want to prejudice the consumer. We certainly don't want to take him to the point where he has to, well, he can't pay. And no, as a state, then we want to put something in place to guard against that. So what is it that you have put together?
Right. So the real challenge is that the demand on the system has not grown significantly in many, many years. The economy has not grown robust enough for a number of decades. And the demand remains around 670 megawatts. The light shining through is as the economy comes back to being more competitive and there's economic growth, and the demand will grow and you have greater efficiencies being introduced. But on the horizon is that this electric vehicle strategy is very important because that will help to grow the demand, and therefore you have more demand being utilized across the asset base of the company. And then you will start to see some economies of scale chipping in. But the heart of it is that demand has to grow. The economy has to grow, the demand has to grow, and electric vehicles is one such highlight looking forward to.
Just before Senator Golden Campbell comes in, you referenced some hydro being part of the mix. Where do you contemplate getting the water from? Because as I understand it, when the water goes into the system, it becomes dirty water, and I use the word dirty advisedly, and that has to then be pumped back into the aquifer for it to be cleaned up. Where do you contemplate getting this from? I'm pretty interested because we have some other challenges. Whilst you're contemplating taking the water to generate this power, where do you contemplate getting it from? And then how would it be cleaned up?
Right, so the technology for hydroelectricity, well, I've never heard it said it gets dirty, because normally in Jamaica, the options are with run of the river hydro systems, meaning that they're small rivers. We're not interfering with the riverway. We're not interfering with economic activities downstream. You may divert a portion of the water through a turbine, but it gets back into the waterway downstream. The rivers that have been identified, they run from in a country to the sea, and therefore I'm not seeing much of a dirtying takes place. What is a bigger issue would be climate change. As the temperatures get hotter, then some amount of evaporation takes place, and the run of the river hydro. In fact, many of the rivers are doing worse off than before. However, there were some feasibility studies done, and it is on the merits of the feasibility studies that the government is hoping to go to market. There are studies done to alleviate or to reduce the upfront costs to investors.
I take that to mean the fact that you're saying that these rivers run land, we're talking about in the mid island and running to the north coast.
Yes.
And any plant which you contemplate putting in place would have to move. You'd have water moving from the north to the south, because that's where most of the generating capacity is actually used. And you'd want to locate the plant somewhere mid-island.
No. The hydros the plants have to be located on the riverway. For hydro, one of the interesting things about renewables, not only hydro, but renewables, whether it is solar, wind, or hydro, one of the challenges is that you have to use it where it exists. You can't move the wind to another location. It has to be generated where it exists, and that's why we do studies to determine wind speed, wind direction, sustainability of the wind, hydro flows.
Mr. Vidal, I wanted to focus a little bit on the water because I'm very concerned. Member Paul will know that when Mr. Barnett from the NWC came last time and spoke about moving all the water from the St. Catherine Plains into Port Royal, that I was particularly disturbed. And I'm still disturbed when I hear you mention of harnessing hydro. And I'm not certain that, notwithstanding all the technical studies which have been done, that because I'm seeing examples of the saline conditions of the soil in St. Catherine, because we have been siphoning off the water for other purposes, going to other areas. And so the salt is getting into the aquifers, and you know what flows from that. Be that as it may, I suppose I'll have to take it elsewhere. But for your, I just wanted to see where exactly you would be taking that particular the water source from, so that it would give me some idea as to how the area would be impacted. Thank you.
Yeah, just to tell him, Mr. Campbell, that it's two different concepts. The one that Mr. Barnett has spoken about is moving hydro from one part of the country to another part. That's not what the hydro in the cabinet approval, 36 megawatts.
Yeah.
None of those are removing water from where they normally run. There are mini hydros running along established rivers, and none of that water is being removed from anywhere to anywhere. It is in its It is normal course. That's the approval we have. Now there are discussions taking place about how do we move water from where it's abundant to where it is needed.
Yeah,
That's a different concept entirely.
very well, very well.
Sure.
Member Campbell?
This is their convenient time, Minister.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Member Golden Campbell. Sorry, member, go. I have to remember that.
Thank you, sir. I just wanted to go back a little bit to some of the comments that Member Paulwell had made in relation to the concerns for the length, the duration of the licenses, and acknowledging that we want a competitive environment, acknowledging comments from Mr. Vidal regarding the constancy of the demand over the last however many years, and the need for increased economic growth to drive that demand. Acknowledging also the cost to consumers and the concern that we don't want to get to a point where consumers can't very well afford to pay the costs that are assessed to them. And lastly, the need for investors to have some amount of surety in their return on the investment that they make. What and I don't know if Mr. Vidal can opine on this, and maybe Member Powell can share his thoughts as well. What do jurisdictions like ours, small island states or developing economies, who may have this reality? Our numbers are small. How do they treat with these kinds of contractual arrangements and license arrangements in terms of time and the kinds of security that they provide for the investors, given all of the concerns that I have just repeated and expressed? I'd be interested in hearing what potential other examples exist out there for investigation.
Right. Mr. Vidal might be in an invidious position, seeing that he is tied to the minister and can't reveal policy on the go as we're thinking through this matter. But my own view is that Jamaica has proven itself that it is a reliable place for people to do business, that we have rules that govern how people do business, and those rules are clear and transparent. And so the notion that investors used to have that, boy, we need to make sure that we have these ironclad agreements that go to 20 years ought not to be maintained. Also, the cost of electricity is coming down. The technology is improving. And I was very interested to note that we have granted 860 licenses for net billing, for example, where persons get a license to establish their independent system, and I suspect most of these will be solar system, that are grid tied, and they are able to sell during the daytime any additional capacity that they don't need to JPSCO, and they are paid for that. It goes into the JPSCO system and it is able to be distributed. I believe more and more Jamaican investors, so these people who set up facilities at their home, if they can sell more than the 10 kilowatt hours that they're allowed to sell now, that could be an opportunity for more and more Jamaicans to invest in renewables, to sell to the grid, to bring on more capacity to be distributed. It makes it a lot more viable now, Senator, because we're seeing storage. The problem with renewables, the problem with solar is that the sun only shines in the daytime. But we're seeing the technology for storing that electricity improving leaps and bounds. You can now have a solar system tied up with storage by battery that could give you 24 hours worth of electricity. So if we encourage our people, those 800 and odd, and I dare say this could be expanded exponentially if the regulations were to come and if we do some adjustments to the pricing. You could extract from this process alone a lot of generating capacity. Similarly, wheeling, which this is a mechanism whereby a large customer who generates his own electricity can attach to the grid, and for that customer to supply himself from his location in Kingston to Westmoreland by virtue of connecting to the grid. Again, you could bring on board additional capacity that could be deployed by the JPSCO to its other customers from this new generation being brought on by a single customer. And I know it might be a bit confusing, so let me just repeat. Wheeling allows a provider to generate electricity and to service not only where he is in, say, Westmoreland, but for the JPSCO to allow wheeling to take place so that he can, so that electricity can be transmitted to Kingston. And all I'm saying is that you need not restrict that customer to just the power that he needs. He could put in additional capacity that could be deployed elsewhere on the grid. The issue at stake is the price. The price must make sense, because if the price of electricity doesn't go down and go down appreciably in a matter of months or 1 or 2 years, you are going to continue to see people leaving the grid. And at that time, they're going to have a crisis, because you're going to have these people with licenses, PPAs, that nobody can pay for. And I really don't want to create an alarm by any statement I make. So I'll probably not go further in describing what could be the eventuality if that were to continue. And it will continue if we don't address the pricing issue.
Minister, just a quick comment. Just a quick comment, if you might. Minister?
Yeah, go ahead, member.
I think member Golden Campbell's observations brings the issue, I think we bring the issue full circle and really join the issues. And I think Member Paulwell's response touches on it, but there's a larger issue that the country faces, to my mind. And it is that we have certain incentive that we provided for whether it's been in the urban renewal or the special economic zones, that simply are not going to work with the price of electricity as they are. And it is one of the areas, main areas for demand increases. And we find ourselves today with the fact that new investors coming into the space, and there's significant interest to my certain knowledge. We find we have a situation where people are interested in the zone and to be invested in the zone. And the electricity, the energy situation, generally, in electricity in particular, poses a significant challenge. And in looking at this, looking in going forward, we have to visualize, Mr. Vidal and the minister, a situation in which the SEZs or the urban renewal areas, those special incentive areas, we've got to look at it. And the SEZ in particular, because of the custom zone situation, in particular, because of the custom zone, we're going to have to give a careful look at it and to see how we further incentivize, certainly by way of energy, to attract investment in and increase the demand, if possible, through that method. If we're not able to do that, I think some of the foreboding that Member Paulwell talks about, I think we are heading straight into that calamity. Thank you.
Minister, Mr. Chairman, if I may, and thank you for that, Member Hilton. My question though, and I do recognize that we are having, we're making comments in a sensitive area and comments that could, after this meeting, be taken as some sort of alarm bells. And so I want to be very careful in how I ask the questions that I ask. And I also want to invite some caution in how those listening to us might perceive the discussions that we're having, because these genuinely and truly are discussions, and we're taking an investigative approach in a review of this bill. My concern is that in looking at a review of the bill and what potential amendments and so on we need to make to this bill, that we are really correctly and thoroughly investigating the landscape that we have traversed since this bill was last before the Parliament, and also taking a careful look at the basis of the projections we are making for the future of the industry and the electricity services in general over the next however many years. And so I hear Member Paulwell's cautions and concerns. I mean, I also know that the path to taking some of the positions that would cause those concerns to be realized is not exactly an unburdened path. There are a lot of hurdles to getting off the grid that not everybody can overcome. But in relation to the kinds of things that we should be looking at as legislators in relation to the provisions of the bill, are we then, out of this particular discussion, looking at an expansion in terms of the provisions for electricity licenses? What is that looking like, and what is it that the ministry what's the kind of direction that the ministry is going in relation to that particular segment of the bill?
Mr. Vidal?
Sure. Thank you, members. It is true to say that the comments raised from all angles are pertinent and are relevant to the discussion. We face a dilemma, really. And the dilemma is that the electricity grid is an island grid. Island meaning Jamaica stands alone and there's no interconnections with any other country, which means that all its electricity needs has to be generated on the island. The discussion, which I think Senator Golden Campbell is rightly asking us to consider, is how do we go forward given the dilemma that we face? Because as it is now, while many Jamaicans, 860 are participating in net billing, for example, at the end of the day, it is those who are most able financially that are first out the blocks, that are the ones participating most. In other words, there are many Jamaicans who would love to and are not able to. But as was also said by Mr. Paulwell, the high prices or continued high prices is going to force others to want to get off the grid. Now, when those who are able to and those who force their way and get off the grid, at the end of the day, you are left with a grid with fewer persons, the more vulnerable persons, and that downward spiral is energized. It seems to me that all the people who want to come off the grid, all, bar none, still need the grid. That is just how the technology for solar works. You need incoming voltage from some other source to operate. You cannot operate on your own unless you're fully battery storaged, not interfacing with the grid. But if you're connected any at all, you need a grid. All the persons, net billers, power wheelers, auxiliary connectors, they all need the grid. And therefore, we have to find a way to make sure that as policies development, as legislation is put in force, that we have to make a decision to support the health and integrity of the grid. The health and integrity of the grid, because everybody requires the grid to operate. I'm saying that to say that while persons are applying for license and getting their licenses approved, the legislation, as I understand it, makes provision for net billers, power wheelers, auxiliary connectors, and also those we call independent power producers. Net billers, power wheelers, and auxiliary connectors apply to the ministry for their licenses to be processed. Independent power producers would have to respond to an RFP, request for proposal, from the generation procurement entity. What we collectively must do is to find a mechanism in policy and legislation to ensure that there's an appropriate balance between those who interface as customers, existing customers through net billing, power wheeling, auxiliary connections, and those who interface as independent power producers, and the terms on which that interface takes place, right? But I just have to say that the investments that are required in generation, similarly, investments are required in the transmission. Similar investments are required in the distribution. The grid is the big issue, if you ask me. Its ability to move power from point A to point B. So with all the new generation infusion at different points, if the grid is not able to move it efficiently from point A to point B, then we'll not get the efficiencies that we're looking, and therefore the cost reductions that we're looking. To the point about the special economic zones, yes, it is an important point, because that is where you're going to get much of the production that you're looking for. But as is, the price of coming from the JPS is not attractive enough for this kind of economic activity. But by carving out a special economic zone with special rates and so forth, I am not too sure that is the solution, because you're still going to have a grid that even the special economic zone would wish to rely on. Power outages will come. Transmission lines will fail. Distribution lines will fail. You have to make a decision whether you're going to develop your own system and provide your 100% backup for it, which has cost implications, or you're going to have a healthy, efficient grid. And some of what I believe the solution will come from is how the policies and the legislative framework allows for the appropriate investments, the appropriate oversight by the regulators, and of course, the appropriate levels of investment that will take place to make sure that ultimately this 100% electrification we're talking about, persons are able to connect and benefit from a secure and reliable electricity source, and also one that is efficient and one, I would admit, adaptable, because we're moving to this time now where smart grids, smart intelligent grids, how customers interface with the grid. Those who may wish to pay a lower rate and subject themselves by regulations to interruptions as the grid is managed, or those who may want to pay a higher rate and get no outage at all. I'm saying that these are concepts that are happening all over the world, where customers are getting opportunities to choose what kind of customers they want to be. But at the end of the day, it is the grid that everybody seeks to rely on. So the conversation doesn't stop at those who want to leave the grid. How do we make the electricity grid where it is the first choice for your electricity service? No, that's a tall ask, but that's just part of the reality.
Mr. Chairman, if I might interrupt at this point, thank you for that, Mr. Vidal. But the question as to how you do that in the last comment really has to begin from the policy point of view. And I am trying to wrap my mind around this entire area to be guided as to the legislative approach that I would wish to recommend as a member of this committee. And what I'm getting the impression that we have more questions from a policy point of view that would need perhaps a little bit more consideration and investigation to be able to drive the legislative change. I don't know that you make law first to guide policy. It seems to me that we first need to be clear on the policy direction that we're taking with all the various facets. And I do appreciate that it is an area experiencing rapid change at this time, and I don't expect that is going to that's going to be any different in a couple of years' time. But is it your view then that we might be a little prematurely looking at legislative changes? Is that, and I don't know, Minister, if that should be more directed to you, but I'm feeling as if we have questions that really reside in the policy matrix, not the legislative matrix.
I think, member Campbell, I think that your point is valid. But what I would say is that I think that what we need to do is raise those and get full clarification on those policy issues, both within the select committee, and of course, if there's any specific information that you require, then the ministry will be open to give you that information to better inform you. But as it stands now, your point is well taken, and I think Mr. Vidal and the team will take that into account. But as I said before, it's a collaborative effort of this Joint Select Committee, and therefore members that may want specific information, policy information in terms of where we are going. Obviously, it's sensitive, so it can't just be discussed in the open, but would be available to have discussions individually in relation to any information and input that you would need from the ministry.
And Chairman, I'm thankful for that. I know that is your approach. I have seen it myself, and I thank you very much, you and your team, because I am very conscious of the fact that these issues that we discuss here are sensitive, and that there could be a tendency for those listening to take them out of context and to become very alarmed. So I don't want to raise that kind of alarm at this stage. So thank you for that.
You can rest assured that this joint select is obviously public. It's been broadcasted on PBCJ, and of course, it's a very hot button item in terms of electricity and the cost and all the things that go with it. So we have to be very mindful and careful, but that does not prevent individual members from both sides of getting proper briefs and information from the ministry to guide you in your deliberations and your questioning.
Minister, I would just like to sort of say one last thing on the matter, because all is not lost. I believe that there is hope, and it has to start with a recognition that somehow we have to get the price of electricity down. You as a consumer will not be satisfied with the current state of affairs, and you therefore must be looking to a future where the JPSCO price comes down, or you will have to exercise some other option. Now, you've asked a question about policy and legislation, and for me, especially now as we're doing this, everything is everything, because it is a policy that we are trying to get at that will drive the legislation, and it might very well be that the ministry will want to contemplate some of these issues and come back to us. We do anticipate that the OUR will be making presentations along with JPSCO. So we're going to have, I believe, fertile ground for all of these issues to be aired and for some determination to be achieved. I just want to signal one area, because Mr. Vidal has quite rightly pointed out some of the inefficiencies in the grid. And you have both technical and non-technical inefficiencies. One of the things that I have been highlighting recently is the high cost of theft that you, Senator, have to pay for. And we are told that it amounts to about 17% of your bill. One of the questions, Mr. Vidal, is the law now provides for a system benefit fund. And it was thought that there would be some resources that would be placed to enable us to achieve rural electrification and so on and so forth. The proposal that I have, and there are some persons who have reacted negatively to it because they believe that it's an attempt to reward people who steal. I don't see it that way. I believe that electricity is an essential facility for life, just as water has been, and that those 200,000 customers who now steal electricity and burden the grid, those of us who pay, this provision in the law can provide some remedy, and for some source of funding to be provided, and I have identified one, where the country recognizes a responsibility, and that this is not just a JPS problem, it's a national problem. And if we can provide the resources, again, using the new technologies to get these persons off the grid, it will mean that your electricity bill will go down significantly and that there won't be a mad rush for people to get off the grid.
Mr. Vidal?
Yes, Minister. All right. Yes, the System Benefit Fund is an opportunity for funding, and I itemize the areas that it can help, and certainly rural electrification is one such. It doesn't mean that it is in rural.
Sorry, Mr. Vidal, just to say, Member Paul, but you will be aware, I just want the rest of the committee members to be aware also that the rural electrification is no longer housed in MSET. It has now gone to Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development. And the whole unit has been transferred since the new cabinet was named in September 2020.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Minister. Yeah, so the System Benefit Fund does allow for some support for rural electrification. Just wondering, Mr. Paulwell, that the 200,000 persons, I understand the important point you're making about the burden that they cause on other customers. But I would like to see a greater emphasis on regularizing these 200,000, regularizing them rather than removing them from the grid totally, because regularizing them has the potential to have more people paying for the electricity sold and therefore reducing the cost overall. Now, I know the big question is affordability and ability to pay and these other socioeconomic imperatives. But I support people having choices, and I support people having options to make economic choices. And just to reiterate something said earlier, that we have to look at this from a broader policy perspective. So as Minister said, we're more than happy to share specific information to support further, to further enrich the discussions.
Member Paul, well, there has been discussions with JPS on this matter with myself and the ministry team on several occasions since I took responsibility. And I'm sure that they will be speaking to this issue in more detail when they present. So I wouldn't want to preempt them, but it's a matter at the top of the discussions.
Okay, very well.
If I might want to add something, Minister, that to the point Mr. Powell made about, and rightfully so, the concern about those who steal electricity. JPS has represented to the ministry that those who steal electricity, not all, but quite a large portion of those who steal electricity are those likely to be using incandescent bulbs, high energy consuming incandescent bulbs that are so easily accessible on the market. And that further fuels the impact of electricity theft. And Minister, it has been your priority since taking up office to treat with the matter of incandescent bulbs. So maybe I want to say more on that, Minister.
There is a cabinet submission being done on that now. Members should be ready for cabinet at any time, and then there will be announcement coming out of that cabinet deliberation. But there will be changes as it relates to that. Is there any other member that wants to contribute? Because I'm not seeing everybody on. Let me just see here. Right. Any other member that would like to make a contribution to the or a response to the ministry's presentation through Mr. Vidal?
Chair, it's not so much a contribution, but just a quick question. The review of the act, I imagine, would necessarily require also changes in any regulations that have been promulgated under the act. And if Mr. Vidal could just send something to us, I'm not recalling it's specifically being dealt with in his presentation, but if he could just send us a note to us of the various regulations and maybe orders that have been made under the act, so we could just take a look at those as well in the course of the discussion.
Noted, Mr. Vidal, you got that request?
Yes, I got the request, Minister, and that on slide number, there's a slide there which speaks to regulations, and you will see from it that the only one that has been approved so far is the government electrical regulator. The others are in draft. So this is a very good opportunity to review the legislation, and those regulations could also benefit.
Thank you, Mr. Vidal. I'm a little handicapped because through some technical issues, it seems I didn't get a copy of your presentation. So I was trying to follow quickly while you were speaking. Thank you, though. I'll take a look at it when it does get to me.
Sure, but there's a slide which deals with the regulations and the amendments that are in train. Sure, thanks.
So members, I think the presentation was well received. A number of comments, questions, and inputs. I think now the point that Member Campbell raised in relation to policy versus legislation, if there's any need for any information by any of the members, please feel free to pass that through me, and I will deal with the internal ministry structure to get appropriate responses for you, because I think it's important that where you're not clear, you get full clarity prior to obviously opining on changes and the legislation. As I said before, it definitely is a complex, sensitive issue. It's and has always been, because obviously the dissatisfaction in relation to the cost of energy in the country. But I think that we are moving in the right direction. And as I said, we will collaborate. I see that Member Paulwell and Hilton, who both have significant experience, have made very, very key inputs, which we'll have to take on board within the ministry. And we're going to look forward to hearing from the players, the industry players. Ms. McCarthy, can you advise us as to how many requests we have gotten for presentations to this point?
So far, Minister, I have sent to members all that we have received so far. I'm thinking, not looking at my email right now, but I think we got about 3 or 4 submissions thus far. One from an public individual, in terms of a member of the public, and I think 2 entities, Jamaica Chamber of Commerce, as well as, I'm not remembering the name of the entity right now. But we have 3 already that are forwarded to members.
The OUR, we received one from the OUR and a member of the public.
Yes.
All right, so we would ask you to schedule those, and obviously we'd have to give a timeline in terms of the presentation to make sure that that everybody gets the opportunity. And we have agreed to extend to the 5th of May, so I think that would need to be communicated to the wider industry and the public at large. And then we would need some dates, some possible dates for the follow-up meetings. Do you have any dates in mind that you have set with the parliamentary schedule?
So far for me, the only date that is free based on the schedule of the other committees, we only have May 19 at 10. It's possible also for the 26th at 2, if the sectoral debate doesn't continue to then. But for now, a short date would be May 19.
But if the sectoral debate continues, how does that interfere with us at 10?
Because it would go to Wednesday, sir, and the 26th is a Wednesday.
Oh.
So far what we've been having is Tuesdays and Wednesdays at 2. So the 2 o'clock for Wednesday would be impacted by the sectoral debate. That's why I'm saying if there's no sectoral debate on that date, then the 26th would be a possible date at 2.
So that would only be 2 dates?
So
that would only be 2 days?
Yes, sir, from me.
And do you think that we could take the presentations so far that we have? We don't know what is to come, but do you think 2 days would be sufficient for those presentations to be completed?
Well, depending on the number of submissions that we get after these 3 that we've had, it is possible depending on the timing. I remember the agreement in the first meeting was for 10 minutes allowance, 10 to 15 minutes. Thinking depending on the questions and the interaction with members, then it might allow for at least 3 presentations per meeting. So we might.
What's the timeline for the presentation? Sorry, what's the timeline for the presentation?
I think we had agreed to 10, the committee had agreed to 10 minutes. 10? I think so. I'm not sure.
10 minutes sounds 10 minutes sounds short. 10 minutes definitely sounds short.
Yes.
I don't know. I would suggest at least 15 to 20 minutes, especially for the bigger ones.
Yes.
So I would say to the committee that I'd propose 20 minutes. If there's if they have not completed, we could possibly give out a 10-minute extension if it is, but start at 20 minutes.
Okay.
Is that accepted? Is that agreed?
I agree, especially for the OUR.
Yeah, if people can complete before 20, that's fine, but especially JPS and OPR and OUR and 1 or 2 others of the big stakeholders, we may need to give more time. So can we agree on those dates? Repeat them again for me, Ms. McCarthy, please.
The 19th of May at 10, sorry. And the 26th, if possible, depending on the schedule for House. The 26th would be at 2.
All right, and then at the next meeting, you will give us the June dates then.
I could work with your office as well to get some dates and then send it to members for agreement.
Please, and then you can circulate the dates to the membership just to see the feedback from them.
Because you also have
members, I would definitely, yeah, I have the cybercrime. I would really like to move this along and not make the timelines for meetings too far apart, because then we lose the momentum. And I would like to obviously have the cybercrime as well. So I have 2 joint selects that I would really like to get put before we go on parliamentary vacation back in, I guess, in July. So that's what I'd like to work towards, so that we can conclude prior to the parliament break in July. So we go to AOB. Any other business? Anybody has anything they want to raise on the AOB? All right, I move for the adjournment. Can I get somebody to?
I second, Minister.
Okay, Senator Allen. All right, so we didn't do bad today. 12:11, and we started dead on time, 2 hours. And it was obviously more intense because of the ministry's presentation and the questions that came after. So I think we'll be able to stick within 1.5 hours, max 2 hours going forward, and move the committee along. And as I said, it's a very, 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 very important and highly emotive subject area that we're dealing with. So we have to make sure that we are fully seized of that. I see Big Rob, MP Robert Miller.
Yes, Minister.
You wanted to say something, or are you just putting your name on the screen?
No, man, my name has always been on the screen, but I'm a little bit quiet in the background, but I wanted to move the motion. But Senator Allen was acknowledged for doing so.
All right, so you second then. All right, so members, thanks a lot. Very useful inputs from members, especially members Hilton, Golden Campbell, Paulwell, and others. And we look forward to seeing on the 19th of May for the next meeting of the Joint Select at 10 a.m. in the morning. Thank you very much. Keep safe. God bless you all.
Thank you, Minister. Take care.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, everyone.
Good day, Chair. Good day.